What I'm about to tell you sounds unreal, but every piece of it is grounded in history. Imagine driving down a road, just a normal road, right? Now picture this. For nearly 120 miles straight, every few yards, there's a body hanging on a cross. Not one, not 10, 6,000, all lined up, stretching from Rome to Capua, like some kind of nightmare you can't wake up from. This wasn't chaos, this wasn't rage, this was strategy. Rome didn't just punish rebellion, they turned it into a message you couldn't ignore. Every traveler, every merchant, every enslaved person forced to walk that road had to see it, had to feel it, had to understand exactly what happens when you stand up against the system. All right, so now you've got that image locked in. Miles of crosses, bodies hanging, a message Rome wanted burned into everyone's mind. But here's the thing, those men didn't arrive at those crosses as whole human beings, not even close. By the time they got there, they were already completely wrecked. See, Roman law didn't just allow crucifixion, it required something before it, a stage called verberatio. Basically a pre-execution beating so brutal, it was meant to break your body without actually killing you. Yeah, they needed you alive for what came next. So here's how it went down. The condemned would be stripped naked and tied to a low stone post. No dignity, no protection, completely exposed. Then 2 soldiers stepped in with this weapon called a flagellum. Think leather whips, but with chunks of metal or lead woven into the ends, not designed to sting, designed to tear. And they didn't take turns politely. They alternated, striking over and over, back, sides, shoulders, even down to the legs. There was no set number of hits. No, okay, that's enough. The only rule? Don't let him die. Let that sink in. There was literally a soldier assigned just to watch the victim. Not to help him, not to show mercy, but to make sure he stayed alive long enough to suffer through the next stage. If someone passed out, they brought him back, threw water on him, shook him awake. And people didn't just walk away from this beaten up. Some were described as physically shattered, not metaphorically, like their bodies were barely holding together. But here's where it gets even crazier. All of that damage, the blood loss, the torn flesh, the exhaustion, that wasn't the end goal, it was preparation. Every wound, every drop of blood lost was carefully setting the stage for how long they would last on the cross. Because Rome didn't want a quick death. They wanted a slow one that people could watch. And what happened next, the moment they were forced to carry part of their own cross through the streets, that's where the real public spectacle began. So after that brutal beating, when their bodies were already hanging by a thread, that's when Rome made sure everyone saw them. Because this was never meant to be private. The condemned were handed something called the patibulum, the horizontal beam of the cross. We're talking roughly 65 to 110 pounds of solid wood. And yeah, they had to carry it themselves. Think about that for a second. You've just been whipped to the point your body is barely functioning. Blood loss, shock, muscles torn up, and now you're forced to drag this massive beam through the streets. Not quietly either. This was a full-on procession. People lined the roads, crowds gathered, some watched in silence, others mocked, shouted, pointed, and every step forward wasn't just physical pain, it was humiliation, put on display for everyone to see. Because Rome wanted the message loud and clear. This is what happens when you step out of line. And when it came to Spartacus's rebellion, they took that message to a whole different level. After Crassus crushed the uprising, he didn't just execute the survivors and move on. No, he turned it into something massive, something impossible to ignore. 6,000 men stretched along the Via Appia, the busiest road in the entire Republic. Not randomly placed either. This was planned. Every few dozen yards, another cross, another body. So no matter who you were, senator, merchant, traveler, enslaved worker, you couldn't pass through without seeing it. Over and over and over again. But here's the part most people don't realize. This wasn't really aimed at Rome's enemies on the battlefield. It wasn't about foreign armies. This was aimed at the people inside the system, the hundreds of thousands of enslaved individuals who kept Rome running. And what happened when those men finally reached the execution site? How they were placed on those crosses, that's where things get. Now think back to that moment. They've been beaten, dragged through the streets, barely holding on, and finally they reach the execution site along the road. This is where it becomes permanent. The vertical posts, the stipes, were already fixed into the ground. These weren't set up last minute. They were part of the landscape, which means every man walking up knew exactly what was waiting for him. Then came the final step. The patibulum they carried was lifted and secured at the top, and their bodies, they were fastened to it, sometimes nailed through the wrists, sometimes tied, sometimes both. Feet fixed in place, either together or separately, depending on whoever was in charge that day. And here's what's wild. There wasn't one standard method. Roman writer Seneca actually pointed this out. There was no single way to crucify someone. Different positions, different orientations, different setups. And that wasn't accidental. Because when there's no fixed method, there's no ritual, no ceremony, no sense of honor or meaning. It stays chaotic, degrading, unpredictable. There's nothing for the victim to hold on to, no narrative, no identity, just pain and exposure. And that exposure, that was the whole point. Once they were raised up, their bodies were left completely out in the open, full height, right next to one of the busiest roads in the world. No cover from the sun, no privacy. Day and night, people passed by. Trade caravans, officials, landowners, and enslaved workers. Especially them, because they were the real audience. Rome even had a term for this, servile supplicium, basically the punishment reserved for slaves. This wasn't just about killing rebels. It was about drawing a line in the most brutal way possible. A living warning, nailed into the skyline. And here's where it gets even more intense. The real cause of death on that cross? It wasn't what most people think. Not the wounds, not even the blood loss. It was something slower, something way more terrifying. So now picture this. You're hanging there, nailed or bound to the cross, your body already destroyed from everything that came before. You'd think the wounds would be what kills you, right? Nope, that's not how this worked. The real cause of death was something way more drawn out, suffocation. Here's how brutal it actually was. With your arms stretched out and elevated, your body weight pulls your chest upward. That position locks you into a constant inhale. Sounds weird, but basically, you can breathe in, but you can't breathe out unless you force it. And forcing it, that's the nightmare. To exhale, you had to push yourself up, either with your legs or by pulling with your arms. Just enough to relieve the pressure on your chest so you could let the air out. Now imagine doing that. Over and over, for hours, sometimes days. Every single breath becomes work. Real, painful, exhausting work. And remember, this is happening on a body that's already been torn apart by the flogging. Muscles shredded, blood loss, dehydration kicking in hard under the heat. Every push upward feels like your body is tearing all over again. But here's the part that really messes with your head. The Romans knew exactly how this worked. When they secured the feet to the cross, giving the victim something to push against, that wasn't mercy. That was strategy. It kept you alive longer. It forced you to keep fighting for each breath, because the longer you lasted, the longer people could watch. And yeah, they could control it too. If they needed someone to die faster, there was a method: breaking the legs. Once that happened, you couldn't push up anymore. The chest locked in place, and suffocation followed within minutes. Quick, efficient. But for those 6,000 men along the road after Spartacus, that didn't happen. No orders to speed it up, no shortcuts. They were left there under the Italian sun, heat rising, wounds open, bodies slowly giving out. Some lasted hours, some lasted days, and the entire time, life just kept moving around them. People walked past, trade continued, no pause, no interruption. And what happened after they finally died? That's where Rome's message didn't just end, it got even colder. So after all that, after the hours or even days of fighting for every breath, you'd think at least death brought some kind of closure. It didn't, because Rome wasn't finished with them yet. See, in Roman culture, burial actually mattered, a lot. Even disgraced citizens usually got some kind of funeral rites. Families could mourn, bodies could be laid to rest. It was how the living said goodbye. But not here. Not for these men. Crucified slaves, especially rebels, were denied that completely. No burial, no final rites, nothing. Their bodies were left right where they died, hanging on those crosses along the road. And this wasn't neglect. This was policy. If a family somehow tried to claim the body, it was entirely up to the authorities to allow it. And for people tied to a rebellion like Spartacus, that permission was almost never given. So what happened instead? The body stayed there. Days turned into weeks, under the open sky, exposed to everything: heat, insects, weather, and scavengers, vultures, ravens, wild dogs. Yeah, it gets that real. And here's the thing, people back then didn't even treat that as shocking. Roman writers mention it almost casually, like it was expected. Just part of the process, because it wasn't just about punishing the person on the cross. It was about extending that punishment outward to anyone who knew them. Their families, their communities, other enslaved people watching it all happen. No burial meant no closure, no peace, just this lingering, unresolved grief. The message didn't stop when the man died. It stayed visible, rotting in the sun, impossible to ignore. And eventually, when there was barely anything left, they weren't buried with dignity. No ceremonies, no names carved into stone, just cleared away by road crews so the Via Appia could keep functioning like nothing ever happened, like they were never there. But here's where it hits hardest. Out of those 6,000 men, not a single individual name was recorded. Not one. And what that says about how Rome understood power, that's the part that still sticks with us even now. So now, step back and look at the full picture. You've got this road, the Via Appia, one of the greatest engineering achievements of the ancient world. Built to move armies, connect cities, power and empire. And at one point in time, it also became something else entirely, a message. Because while wealthy Roman families lined that same road with massive tombs, stone monuments built to make sure their names lasted forever, those 6,000 men, they got the exact opposite. No graves, no markers, no names, just disappearance. And that contrast, that's not random, that's the system. Rome didn't just kill those men, they erased them, not just physically, but historically. Their individual stories, their identities, everything that made them human, wiped out on purpose. What remained wasn't memory, it was a warning. Because when you think about it, this wasn't just punishment for a rebellion. It was a solution to a much bigger problem. At the time, somewhere between 30 to 40% of Italy's population was enslaved. Think about that, millions of people, forced into a system they didn't choose, outnumbering the citizens who controlled them. That kind of imbalance, it's unstable, unless you control it. And Rome's answer wasn't just laws or armies, it was fear. Visible, constant, unavoidable fear. The kind you couldn't ignore, because it was literally built into the roads you walked every day. That's what those crosses were. Not just executions, but infrastructure. A system designed so that anyone even thinking about resisting would remember exactly what they saw on that road. Not just the deaths, but the process, the suffering, the complete erasure that followed. And here's the part that still hits today. Parts of that road still exist. You can walk it. Stand on the same stones where all of this happened. But there's nothing there that tells you about those 6,000 men. No names, no memorials, nothing. Just silence. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all, because it leaves you with a question Rome never had to say out loud. What does power look like when it doesn't just destroy people, but makes sure they're never remembered? Power isn't just force, it's messaging. They didn't just kill rebels, they turned fear into something you could see every single mile. Systems survive by controlling perception, not just people. Rome didn't need everyone to obey, just enough people to be too afraid to resist. Dehumanization is the first step to control. The moment someone becomes less than human, anything done to them becomes easier to justify. Erasing names is the final form of power. Killing the body ends a life, but erasing the name makes it like that life never existed.